on the ABC News Magazine. 2020 with Hugh Downs and Barbara Walters.
Tonight, imagine it's April 1975. You are a South Vietnamese soldier who fought with the Americans. Now the enemy has won. For you and your family, there's no escape. That was the plight of countless South Vietnamese. Would the communists forgive them? Would America forget them? Sylvia Chase with the many different fates of the friends we left behind.
Why did you want this job?
To help the president, very frankly. I think this is a man who'll go down in history.
On the Barbara Walters 2020 report, Barbara talks to the new White House Chief of Staff, Donald Regan, a self-made millionaire used to giving orders. Now he's carrying them out for the President of the United States. How does he handle one of the world's most demanding jobs? Would he like to be president himself? In a freewheeling interview, some answers from Donald Regan. Also, meet David Lean. Through his eyes, we've taken a passage to India, met Dr. Zhivago and Lawrence of Arabia, and crossed the bridge on the River Kwai. Who is David Lean?
I think he's the best director in the world.
Many agree. But how does he work his magic? Bob Brown will show you in a tribute to the epic maker. Up front tonight, the friends we left behind. If you watched the Oscar ceremonies Monday night, you saw this man, Dr. Hang Nor, receive Best Supporting Actor Award for playing this man, Dith Pran, in the movie The Killing Fields. It's about a man left behind by his American friends, and it brings home the immense suffering inflicted in the aftermath of the wars in Southeast Asia. And it's about the treasure of lasting friendships. It's a true story, and there are others like it. When America pulled out of Vietnam, we left many of our South Vietnamese friends at the mercy of their enemy. That was 10 years ago. And tonight, Sylvia Chase tells what happened to some of those friends we left behind. For some of them, a nightmare began just as ours was ending.
April 30th, 1975. The fall of Saigon. These were the final hours of a conflict whose meaning remains obscured, although it was the most thoroughly publicized in U.S. history. It was a war brought home to Americans by television. There were those unforgettable images as the United States made a frantic, last-minute evacuation. But behind these images of a lost war are others that tell the story of a people, the Vietnamese people, as they watched the collapse of their country and faced a terrible uncertainty. What would happen to them next? Many Vietnamese attempted to escape the country in these final hours. It was a desperate scene as they tried to get into the U.S. Embassy, pleading for help from their American allies. But then suddenly, the North Vietnamese communists were rolling into Saigon to claim their victory. And many thousands of Vietnamese who had worked closely with the Americans were left behind, stranded and in jeopardy. Da Swin Hee, now known by his adopted American name, Michael Ackerman, remembers that even though his father was a Vietnamese Air Force pilot, he was unable to fly his family out of the country to safety.
Did your dad tell you what to expect then? Was he afraid?
He was, yes, he was crying, and he had a gun, and he was trying to kill himself. And my mother was screaming. I think because he was afraid that they might capture him and kill him.
No one knows how many people were killed as ultimate control of Vietnam was seized by the communists. But we do know the Hanoi government ordered the roundup of anyone they felt had helped the American war effort. They hauled them off to detention camps for what they termed re-education.
And said he'll be back in a couple of weeks. And after a couple of weeks and he wasn't back yet, and we got a letter that he said he'll be there for a while and he doesn't know when he's gonna come back.
Over 1 million Vietnamese like Michael Ackerman's father were sent away to camps. They included everyone From the general who planned military strategy with us to the postal clerk whose sin was delivering American mail. The communists also took away priests, school teachers, radio announcers, anyone with any degree of public influence. In the early months, re-education consisted of hour upon hour of indoctrination in communism and the crime of association with the United States. That was nearly 10 years ago, and the North Vietnamese themselves admit to having 10,000 men still in these prison camps. But testimony from those released suggests that the real number still held prisoner is many, many times more. Tran Nhao Tuan was like Michael Ackerman's father, a military man. Tuan was battalion commander in the Vietnamese Marine Corps. After the communists took over, he spent 8.5 years in so-called re-education camps. Suddenly released just over a year ago, he fled Vietnam to join his family in the United States.
When we first entered the camp, everything we said was spied on. The first thing they told us was we were American lackeys, and that was what we had to learn. They said it was a very bad thing, and we had to admit it.
Tuan tells us that political indoctrination soon gave way to forced labor under conditions of starvation rations, non-existent medical care, and often brutal punishments. These rare pictures taken by French television are some of the only ones ever allowed by the Vietnamese. But released prisoners tell us even these scenes were carefully staged, with all but the healthiest inmates kept out of sight. Because our cameras were not allowed in to record the true conditions at these camps, we asked Tuan to tell his story to a Vietnamese artist who made a series of paintings for us of Tuan's life in the camps. This first painting shows the daily routine of marching to forced labor under armed guard.
They kept repeating again and again, we need to make you guys labor a lot and labor well in order to change you, to make good men out of you. Usually they'd only let us stay home when we were too ill even to walk. All of us were so skinny we joked among ourselves that we were walking skeletons, and it was true. I wasn't feeling well that day, so I couldn't finish the work. A Viet Cong soldier asked me, "Why aren't you working? You want to resist or what?" And although I said no, the guy thrust the muzzle of his gun into my stomach. I knew that if I made any resisting move, that Viet Cong soldier would shoot me immediately. Our lives were not even as good as an animal's life. Every night after coming back from work, after finishing our supper, we had to sit together and criticize what we'd done during the day, to self-criticize. And I think that was one of their so-called methods to re-educate us, or to use the Free World's expression, they wanted to brainwash us.
When Tuan tried to organize a gathering of friends at the camp, he was cruelly punished for his efforts.
In this painting, they locked me up in a closed, small cell. Day and night, there was only a dim light, and one of my feet was shackled to an iron bar that ran through the wall, and they locked it from the outside. I myself was locked up for 24 days and nights in 1979.
But worse than punishment was the constant, unrelieved hunger. Tuan tells us that food became the prisoners' main obsession.
We were constantly hungry, and also lacked every kind of nutrition necessary to maintain a human body. Some just sat there counting every grain of corn. Some just placed the food in front of them and looked. They didn't even dare to eat. We tried by all means to see to it that we'd get some protein, something that our bodies lacked. A lot of moths would fly into the house. We then tried to catch them and eat them alive, because we thought they'd provide us with some nutrition to nourish our bodies. Because of malnutrition, we all suffered from physical debility that once caused 3 among 250 of us to die in the same day.
This song of despair was secretly composed and committed to memory in a re-education camp. And all these people listening to it either escaped or were released from camps and made their way to freedom in America. They include people who in their former lives were a high school teacher, a policeman, a minister. The song says, "Let me be a cow, because a cow can at least eat grass. Let me be a tree to drink from the brook. How mad is man? How long can he live that he treats men so?"
I was paralyzed because of malnutrition and hard labor. I didn't die, I think, because I had strong will compared to most others. I had witnessed many people die. I also witnessed many, many go insane or commit suicide.
I resisted. Therefore, I was locked up in the discipline cell. It was pitch dark. I couldn't see sunlight for 3 months. I was shackled. They call it 5-point shackled. My arms and my legs were stretched out and shackled to the ground. My neck shackled too. I had to lie tied up to the ground, unable to move. 30 of us were 5-point shackled. If I remember correctly, only 2 of us, and I'm one of them, lived.
The Vietnamese have repeatedly refused to let the Red Cross inspect these camps, which violate United Nations agreements. When Amnesty International visited, they came back reporting terrible human rights violations. Foreign Minister Nguyen Co Tak was asked about these violations recently in Vietnam by my colleague Tom Jarrell.
Independent groups, Amnesty International, visited a camp in 1979, and they felt that you were violating human rights, that many basic freedoms for prisoners are being ignored or not being followed.
You see, they do not care about the human rights or the crimes that those people have committed against my people, you know. In Vietnam, we have had 2.5 million people who had cooperated with the U.S. Army. And none of them, not anyone of these 2.5 million had been punished by capital punishment. And even they have committed mass massacre and many crimes against my country.
Dr. Paul Wolfowitz is the United States Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs.
They're political prisoners. They're people who are in prison because of their past political associations, principally the largest group of them because of association with us or with the government of South Vietnam.
This is Cuc Minh Ta, another member of the Vietnamese community living here in the United States. Shortly after arriving nearly 10 years ago, Ta formed a group of families of re-education camp prisoners. Like many of the women around this table, Ta hasn't seen or spoken to her husband since the fall of Saigon. Recently, these women began gathering information from Vietnamese families living throughout the United States about a husband or a son still in the camps. They pass this information on to the United States government, hoping something can be done to free their loved ones. They believe, as many do, that their plight, at least in part, is an unmet American responsibility.
In every letter that he writes to me, he reminds me to try and do something for him and others who are now in the same miserable situation with him in the camp. I also get letters from his friends. The words in those letters are heartrending. They say, "We hope someday we may meet you."
Whether or not these women's prayers will be answered depends on high-level negotiations between the governments of Vietnam and the United States. But as often happens with humanitarian issues, it has become bogged down in diplomatic power politics. In a Newsweek article last spring, Vietnam's Prime Minister reiterated his government's 2-year-old offer to release all the prisoners to the United States. In September, Secretary Schultz announced that the U.S. would take 10,000. But the U.S. position is that these men must be evaluated on a one-by-one basis to make sure they are all bona fide political prisoners. The Vietnamese answer is, take them all or nothing.
So from 82, I have declared that if you would like to have all of them, you can have all of them. That they refuse to have them. And now in 84, they have declared that they can have some. This is not very serious.